Hi, I'm Jonathan, and today on Hanging Out with the Guides, we have Angela Ambrosia. Angela, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Jonathan, for having this opportunity for us.
My pleasure. Angela is a love and relationship coach with a deep affinity for helping women navigate unhealed hurts. She is certified as a life coach and relationship coach by World Coach Institute. She is also a certified practitioner of subconscious rapid transformation, a technique of subconscious repatterning that transforms a person's ability to create the relationship of his or her dreams. She is certified as a teacher of meditation and has a 2 decades long expertise in dance and body movement as well. So, Angela, tell me about who you are and what you believe your role is in this life. When you leave this world, what impact do you want to have left?
Who am I? It's a big question. In a material sense, who I am is someone who's come to help people learn how to love themselves. And I do that in particular through listening to the body and the emotions. So I also teach people what is that spiritual journey of loving the self through hearing the body and feeling your emotions and making sense of it all, because it can be quite messy. And who I am is to really guide people in how to have fun with that, how to make it simple, and how even if it's complicated, confusing, hard, there is a path, but it's got to be your path. And I really show people how to do it themselves without listening to the outside sources or the crazy stuff in their head. So when I leave, I really want to have a source of tools, books, audio MP3s, which will help people to heal a lot of their unresolved stuff. And that's my main thing that I'm working on, is building that opus of work.
It makes a lot of sense. It's nice thinking about how your messages can live on after you're gone, that your messages are still here, that people can still be benefiting from you.
Definitely. I've found also, because my past was a dancer, that when I danced, the moment was so magical, but it was gone, and the memory still lives inside my body. But in the meditations, what I was hoping to leave with people is that feeling of the joy or the love that you can experience in your body and emotions. And that's what I've spent the last 20 years actually refining and developing.
So maintaining the experience of the actual experience of what was happening.
Yeah.
That's very cool. And how did you get to where you are today? Tell me some of the key parts of your story that might allow people, wherever they are in their own paths, to relate to you and the path you traveled to where you are now.
I've had a very diverse life. I started out in my 20s as a dance performer and a dance healer, and exploring the body through dance and shamanism through the body and movement. And what happened was that I would have these deep connections to myself, but then when I would step into a love relationship with a man, I would just be a wreck. I would be an emotional mess. I would be thinking, does he like me? Does he really want to be with me? My relationships were a mess. They kept on breaking up. It was easy for me to find them, but they didn't stay. And that was a good 10 years. And then when I started to get relationships that did last longer, I just had all these problems, and my mental stuff took over, and it was a mess. And I felt basically uncomfortable in my own skin, which was really confusing, because as a dancer I felt very comfortable. And so then when I started working more with spiritual work and meditation, I started to ask the questions. And perhaps the two biggest things that happened was the death of my parents, because once they had passed, I realized that there was no real need for me to start living into that expectation that they had for my life, but that I hadn't really shaped who I was. So the spiritual journey, the spiritual meditation work, was always about going more and more inside. And then I had to actually face these crazy thoughts in my head, and this like putting myself down, like I wasn't worth anything. And that's when I became obsessed with how am I going to take that confidence I felt in my dance into my personal, intimate relationships with a man and have a long-term relationship. So that basically became my mission. I'm going to have a relationship that makes me happy. And the journey really was about finding that joy in myself and that self-appreciation. And one of the things also from childhood that was really big was depression. I had teenage depression for at least, I would even say, right into my 20s, from about 13 to 22. So a nice good 10 years of it, sort of. And I really didn't have a support system or a way out. And if it wasn't, in my opinion, for my spiritual connection, I wouldn't be here today. So I think that depression was a huge part of my growth, and I feel strongly for people experiencing it, because there is that point where you can actually find a way out, but it just feels like there is none. And I totally know that because that's how I lived as a teenager. So those were some of the big things for me.
I knew I resonated with you. As I listen to your story, I hear even more of my own experiences in the past and what I resonate with in people that I can see where they are, because that in the intensity of that negativity that you've been in, I know that well. But we grow a lot from it. Then we're in a place that we can guide others through it, and there's a saying of some kind of like short story about a guy who's walking by. There's a guy who's like stuck in a hole, and there are people walking by, and there's a doctor who walks by, and he's like, doctor, save me, get me out of the hole. And the doctor writes a prescription, throws it down. He's like, but how am I going to get out of the hole? And then like some other person walks by, and I wish I remembered all the different examples of things where they tried to, they tried to help in their own way, and the guy's still in his hole, and he's like, but stay, like, help me out. I'm still here. Like, you didn't actually help me. And then someone comes by and jumps in the hole with him. And he's like, what are you doing? Now we're both stuck here. And he says, but I was here yesterday, and I can show you the way out. So totally, that's that being there, then that's the only thing that could possibly make us so powerful in helping other people out of there, because we've been there. We know what it's like, and we know what got us out of there. And so then for those people where that resonates, then those particular lessons are applicable. Then it allows us to be that powerful messenger of the what the next handhold is, what the next foothold is, so that they can get out as well.
Yeah. In particular for me, it was the neuroses of my mind and emotions. And mine got so strong. I actually think, I had a real mental health problem, but I self-managed it through a lot of creative expression and through just allowing my heart to sing. And that's what I did as a kid. And then I continued to do it in the dance in my 20s. But I got to know so well how crazy those voices are. And one of my strengths was, even though I had the depression or a lot of negative voices, one of my strengths was that I wasn't scared of them. Of course, I thought, my God, you really don't like yourself. You hate yourself. I was shocked, but I wasn't scared. And most people live in fear of their dark sides or of those voices. For me, I think I was naturally born with a sense of, yeah, that dark stuff's intense, but that's okay. And that's a lot what I have in my coaching work with people. It's like, yep, that's a part of you. So what's it showing you? And half of the struggle, or I think even more, is just not being so scared of those dark aspects of yourself. And most of us live in fear of other people seeing that, of letting it slip out, or it comes out compulsively because we can't keep it down anymore, and then we think, oh my God, what are they going to think about me? So we go into these further judgments about ourselves if we expose that part. And it's very tough because society raises us to think we have to be perfect or we have to be this way. And that's just not true. In fact, that's what I really want to share with people. The more you are yourself, the more you can help your relationships become more authentic, and you will help people become alive, finally alive. Because we've been living under this conditioned concept that we have to be this sort of person for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And it's time for us to truly be individuals. And yes, it may only be a part of the population that reaches that, because there's 7 billion people on the planet, but that part of the population has the chance to do it now in a way that is more equalizing. It's not going to be just everything for me and nothing for you. We're going to start slowly balancing the inequality between people. And it's a slow process. It's not going to happen overnight. That's the other thing. People think spiritual consciousness or evolution happens and it should happen now. That's not how evolution happens. Evolution happens over hundreds and thousands of years. And it's very difficult when we look at ourselves. We start to judge and think, why haven't I got this relationship? Why am I crazy now? Why I should be able to think positive thoughts. It's like the reason you can't is because right now you're having a moment and you have to feel the emotion. And if you are so scared of feeling the emotion, you're not going to have the gift of it. So what I teach is really to just allow yourself to be messy, allow yourself to have that messy feeling. And then you won't really break down. The reason why people break down is because they've tried to squash things down for so long. And now is a time where people are experiencing, especially in the Western countries, we can't keep pressing down our emotions anymore. We can't function like this anymore. It's just not right. Most of my clients have this experience where they're just not able to stop that darker aspect of themselves anymore from being shut down or pushing it away. They have to see it. And there's nothing to fix. You don't have to change. If you just begin to see it, what happens is the fear response system of the body starts to disengage. Because our emotional fear that I can't see that stuff, I can't see that stuff, it's so programmed to freak out and try and shut it down. Once you just look and witness it, as a lot of meditation practice asks you to try, doesn't want you to be perfect, we're just asking you a meditation to try, to see what's coming up. The fear response literally starts to unlock and the nervous system relaxes and you start to find new ways of being with the body and the emotions. And literally that's a whole process that's going to take us maybe 50 years to truly experience as a group, and individually a lot of people are starting to do that. That's why we're in a very special time spiritually, because we're actually learning how to reprogram our emotional brain. And it's exciting that lots of us are doing this now.
It's so interesting, obviously, how we turn things into much more than they are when we add fear to them, because then there's all this judgment and everything else that keeps pushing it away. We can never see it for what it actually is. And so then we can't heal from it, because it's there trying to say something to us, and we're busy avoiding it because we're afraid and judging it as something we shouldn't be paying attention to. And then it's still there, and we turn it into this big monster. And that's the problem. It's not the thing itself. It's the fact that we turn it into a big monster. And if we could just listen to it, pay attention to it, acknowledge it, let it speak up, we could hear it, then it would go on, continue its course. We could just let it go. We can move on to the next thing instead of continuing to fight against this.
Exactly. Yeah. It just reminded me when you were talking of those stories or fears we have as children of the boogie monster under the bed. And when you're a kid, you go to bed sometimes and you still think, is it there? And we live most of our lives in relationship to fear or things that are under the bed that way. But when you're an adult, you can expose the bed and you see it's not there. But we still, in our bodies, we're still like that kid. So we've got to become like an adult with our own body and emotions and go, it's okay. It's okay. See, look under the bed. It's okay. But I mean, that's part of the challenge to look after yourself. That's part of what I teach about loving yourself. You really do have to take the intent and time to do it. If you don't intend to look after yourself that way, change can't happen.
That's exactly true. Definitely. So obviously on this note, continuing this train of thought, what are some of the most important lessons you've learned on your journey, and who have been some of your greatest teachers?
Well, I mentioned before the death of my parents was quite dramatic for me. And I had both times, after first my mother and then my father, I had a spiritual awakening moment or experience. And after my mother, it was also like I noticed that I'd left my body. I wasn't able to handle the grief of her process, of her leaving. So I had a very strong connection to death at that point, and I saw that part of me really just didn't want to be here. And I felt that very strongly in my body. So when I did come back, I realized that choosing to be here, what is it that I want to do? So that's when I started to really go into dance a lot more, when my mother passed. And then when my father passed, it was another quite amazing moment where I met one of my spiritual teachers, Helen Barton, and she has a website called johnthebeloved.com. So she works with a guide, John, and he's all about truly that second piece. What do you want to do to enjoy yourself and your life? And Helen has been the most important teacher for me. If it wasn't for Helen, I don't think I'd be here. I don't think I'd be normal. And I don't think I would have had that meditation practice to really just watch my emotions and my judgments. So she gave me a practice, and a group of us, this really amazing practice of listening to yourself. And she has on the website some amazing coursework as well. If it has any resonance to you, I 1,000% recommend it, because if you find Helen and her work resonates, then do it, because there's no accident if you find the work. For me, it was like the first step to actually hearing my soul by really understanding the difference between the emotions, the thoughts, and this other voice that was actually quite intelligent, smarter than me, and just knew stuff. So I would do the meditation work with Helen, and I'd hear this soul kind of presence say a few words, and I go, oh, that's really smart. That's not how I talk or how I think, really. Who's that? And it was actually my higher self. But I didn't get it at the time. I just started hearing this voice, and I went, oh, okay. I'm understanding how to connect to my higher self. And it really was that simple. It wasn't all the messy stuff of my emotions. It wasn't the intense mental circularity thinking of my thoughts. So Helen was amazing for me. And that was what, over 14 years I've worked with her, and I'm still working with her. Then the other teacher I found much more recently, 2012, was Oneness University. So they have two spiritual teachers, Bhagavan, they're based in India, but they have trainers all worldwide, and I've become certified with them. And they use a brain balancing tool called Diksha. And I do the energy transference of Diksha over the internet. I do it through the hands as well. It actually is a way of calming the brain and changing that fear response that I described before. So it relaxes the messiness of the brain, and it allows the brain to find a new pathway to connect to the prefrontal cortex. So once you actually let go of that intensity of the brain starts to learn a new way, and it allows the higher self to come in much more clearly. The messiness of the thoughts start to relax, the nervous system relaxes, and what happens organically is the heart opens. So their work really helped me quieten that sort of panic part of my brain, which I had developed as a child. I was raised in a situation where I didn't know what to do a lot, and I was left home alone a lot. So I often went into this panic. My body just was like, what do I do? Do I answer the phone? Do I answer the door? You know, I didn't know what to do most of my life. and that panic is still in my nervous system. So what their work, energy work does is actually starts the nervous system to go, it's okay, you're panicking. What are you experiencing? So I actually then have more ability to stay with the fear of what I'm feeling. So the two combined, those teachers have totally given me so much more, like, just, it's not even confidence, it's just a sense of who I am physically. And because I'm such a physical person, I really need practices that are both spiritual and physical and give me that sense of neurobiological or nervous system release. So now, once I was a dancer when I was younger, now I do a lot more meditation work. And I still dance, but the dance even itself is becoming much more of a feeling of energy while I'm still. And I'm just enjoying that so much.
That sounds great, to be able to fuse dance and the different meditation forms that you've learned, to be able to then bring that back to dance and just experience it in a whole new way, where it becomes this healing energy experience, which it in some way always was for you, and it was like, you know, then it was like tied back, that you were able to go back to that creative energy and recognize an even greater power in it for yourself. That's really cool.
Yeah.
So with all the thoughts about death, I'm sure you've thought a lot about life and why you're here. So what is the purpose of life? Why are we here?
I'm a bit of a fan of Helen and John, and it's really to have a good time. It's to enjoy yourself, to enjoy being who you are. And look, everybody on the planet has innately a program that there's something wrong with them, that they're not X, Y, Z enough, not good enough, not whatever enough. So our journey is to discover the part that says that program is not true, and I'm here to actually enjoy this. In spite of all the other stuff, there's this other part that's here to truly live. That's what it is. I mean, it's a simple answer, but it's just about finding what it is that makes you feel joy. Not always easy.
Say it again, to the last part.
It's not always an easy journey to find the joy. I mean, the simplest things are the easiest, fastest ways. Things like looking at your kids or having a kitten or just smelling a flower. They're the easiest ways to find joy. But all of us usually are born with some stuff to process, whatever that is, and it's your stuff. So there's no point comparing, like, why is my life better or worse than that person? The beauty of loving yourself is actually saying, oh my God, this is my stuff. And some of it I don't like. And this I like. So how am I going to just accept the parts I don't like and still have a good time? And then in that process of learning how to have a good time, it exponentially gets more and more joy. And that's what it's all about, just finding that way to get more and more joy, more growth.
And to make use of those tools that we recognize along the way, like for you, dance, that automatically had that joy in it, to be able to bring that back. Yeah, because the more we have of that, the easier it is to stay in the joy when we have the things that naturally brought us joy from the beginning, that we always have that to go back to.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. I don't know when you coach, Jonathan, but a typical thing we notice as coaches, in my experience, is that people so often play down their innate natural gifts. They just sort of go, oh yeah, I can do that. It's like, this is something you're good at. And we just can't see it because it's innate. So our job as coaches is to often really go, hang on, this is like fantastic. And further than that, how does this give you something that you can go further with, or that can do this for you, or can give that to somebody else? Like, we really expand how to enjoy what's already inside you, because sometimes it's just so easy to not appreciate it.
It's true, because when it's innate, and I definitely have seen this obviously with my clients, that, and with myself and with anyone, that when we're so close to something, when it's in us, when we've had it all along, then it's like, well, that of course I have, of course that's true, like yeah, that's true about me. But then you look at other people, and it's like they have this talent and that person has that talent, and like, but look how great this would be, and if only I could do that. And then it's up to us to be able to point out, some outside observer to be able to point out, hey, you realize you have an equivalently great talent that not everyone is as good at. And for them, they're like, what? No, that's, everyone's good at that. Everyone can do that. If I could do that, everyone can do that. But this other thing, not everyone, I can't do that. And then obviously it's up to us to point out, no, not everyone can do what you what you can do. You're really good at that. Not everyone is that good at that.
Yeah, I love how you described it.
I just had that experience with several people recently. So that's with a friend and a couple of clients, and my friend was pretty insistent that, no, everyone can do this. I'm like, I don't have that talent. Like, you're really good at that. That's a gift. That's not like something you could, like, that's as good as anything you're saying I have. Like, I don't know what what the picture is here, that, obviously we can't see what's right in front of us because we see it so often, it fades into the background, and we just accept, well, it's just there, it's always there, it must be there for everyone. And it's up to us to learn that whatever is great in us, we want to take time to acknowledge, because it's not there for everyone. We are experiencing that. We do have that skill, that talent, that gift, whatever. And it's up to us to give it the attention it deserves, because then we would like ourselves much better, because we'd be giving attention to the parts of ourselves that we really like. And then we actually feel really good. And when we acknowledge the specialness of those gifts, that not everyone can do that, then it's even more powerful. That not, obviously that we could bring it out in people around us, but not everyone naturally, can do all the things that we can do, and we can't naturally do all the things that they can do. And it's up to us to cultivate and give attention and energy to the things that we can uniquely do, so that we expand on those things that ultimately would be the things that would make us feel really good about ourselves, so that we can live in that place of feeling really good, and then have great relationships with others where we bring the best parts of ourselves to those relationships.
Yeah, totally.
So in this picture of expanding to greater aspects of ourselves, where does God fit into all of this? Tell me about God. Who or what is God, and what is our relation to such a source or being, or however you think of this?
It's so hard for me to put what God is into words, because I feel the presence of God so much, and it's not in a finite way, especially when I've gone into experiences in my heart where I'm feeling the presence of the divine. I call it the divine. It's much more of a experience than a thing, and for me, and it's life in every object, every aspect of consciousness. So I think I find God easier to explain as a process, that connecting back to what you said about that ever-expanding joy, for me, God is that innate desire or will to know ourselves more, to know what is possible more, to know what is consciousness more. So there is consciousness in this computer I'm talking to you through. There is consciousness in the games that children play, or Minecraft. There is consciousness there. And technology is starting to show us that it can be smarter than what we are. It is consciousness. And it is an attempt for consciousness to know more of what is possible beyond our human brain. So God for me is beyond our ability to conceive what it is, but it is a process of expanding into more and more and more of this universe of what is possible. At this point, our knowledge cannot know or understand the known universe. We simply cannot measure it or even perceive it. And God is like that. It is an infinite ability to experience what is possible. And then in my process, I've also experienced the divine as the same element of expansion in love, because we love in a very, very small, limited capacity. We experience love, but we also stop ourselves from experiencing more love because we might experience a hurt. Hurt is a part of love, because when you go into the hurt or feel it and go through it or beyond it, you experience a greater ability to accept, which is love. So God is also that ability to expand into more ability to love, including going through hurt, betrayal, loss, death, loving people from other countries that you don't even like. I've experienced that personally, so that was a great moment for me when I went, oh, I really love that person, but I was really terrible in my head what I was saying them a few weeks ago, but then I felt this heart opening. So God is able to expand us through love, and also creativity. I, through the dance, found that first. Creativity was always, like you said, for me, my pathway to God, at my first pathway. But when you're truly creative and you're having fun, that's where the divine is. The divine is showing you, let's have a good time. Let's find a way to find out how to do something here. That is also the divine. The divine is showing us that we are incredible, powerful beings with so much potential. And how much do you want to activate that? There's no judgment in God. You are the one that's creating that. So I think we're at a phase of renegotiating our relationship to God, and that for me is more the definition of God right now. What is that relationship to God? I think we're all beginning to create individual definitions of God. Of course, we still have world religion, and that's a huge important piece of this new definition. But individually, even whatever religion we are, God has to have a meaning, a relationship to us. So that's, for me, the key factor we're, at this time, working on.
I like the way you started off with God as an experience, and it sort of continued throughout, but it was interesting the way you used God in a way that a lot of people would, and then kept bringing it back to the idea that God is an experience in a sense, because you're using the word God in a way where people might think of it as a being outside us, and then you're bringing it back to it's an experience that we are having. And I like that interplay, the way you're talking about it, because I think that is the direction of things, that we increasingly recognize the experience within ourselves of God, as opposed to a God outside us, which is often spoken of, by where we need, like, parents and leaders and significant others as sources of fulfillment, and we're looking outside us for things, and for protection, for expertise, for guidance, for fulfillment. And the way you're talking about God as an experience, it brings it right back to us, that the experience is in us, and God is the experience in a sense, or it is an experience of God. And it is almost that then we're recognizing the God in us, and it's like that's what's guiding us toward those experiences of joy and love, and like in a to an extent, in this expansive extent, that where it's just this like growing expansion of that experience of joys that we had never been able to conceive of before, and loves that move through the hurt and move through the fear of hurt, and then can turn into this expansiveness, this free-flowing expansiveness, and the kind of experience an expansive, you know, joy and understanding and all these other things, this expansion of awareness and consciousness kind of experience. So all these, like, these great experiences, I like the way you tied that in very nicely to the idea that we can actually almost call that God, that God is guiding that, God is that, it is the God in us experiencing that, or the divine in us experiencing that we are experiencing the divine in that whole interplay, discussion of that. I like the way you tied that all together.
Thank you. Yeah, I've always had that thing about dance. It's all about a dance, the relationship. So to limit God to a thing, I've always found since very early, since I was about 5, I used to think about it, and I'd go, how can you be a thing if you're so omnipresent and powerful? I just couldn't fathom it. And I think that's the safest place to be, because I'd rather have something bigger than me, almost embracing me so I could grow into that bigger self, rather than expecting me to have all the answers. I don't want to have them. I'd rather have someone else look after it, or something else.
Right, and then to be able to take the leap and be able to say, the experience that I am having is that, rather than it has to be outside me because I don't feel that I am great enough, that we can actually let ourselves evolve into that greatness, that we can actually let ourselves expand into that.
Yeah.
Otherwise we keep ourselves from it because we're seeing it as a thing or a being outside of us, and then we actually keep ourselves from expanding into that. So I like even as soon as we say it's an experience, then it sort of like bridges that gap a little bit, and then we can start to be like, oh, so then I'm expanding the experience, I'm expanding into the experience, I am the experience increasingly, and then it's a whole different perspective on what that actually is, that God that we're talking about, the divine that we're talking about.
Yeah, I wanted to add that when you put it as a relationship or an experience, and going back to one of the things I teach on, which is that all of us think there's something wrong with us. We're born with this innate fear that we're not big enough. We're not that omnipresent thing. And think about it, as kids, we don't know everything. We might have a strong ability to love or a strong connection to spiritual things in nature, and we feel strongly, but we don't know how the world works. So even in our childhood, we're programming that we really don't know what the big people know. And because of that, it triggers our program that there's something wrong with us. So instead of just running into this experience of expansion and joy and creativity and love and stuff, we'll start actually manifesting situations that show us that belief that something's faulty, something's not right, I'm not good enough. And that also comes in and then starts to interfere with our connection to the divine. And the only way to really accept that program is to see it's part of the divine plan, because if we just went out and thought, oh yeah, I'm expansive and I can just do whatever, we actually wouldn't embrace the material world. We wouldn't be able to explore the material world. We wouldn't come up against resistance and know ourselves. We wouldn't use our innate gifts. We wouldn't deny our innate gifts to try and find the power of our innate gifts. We wouldn't actually be able to interact. So that's the confusion a lot of people have. If spirituality is all about expansion, love, and joy, all these fluffy things, why is life sucks? And it's literally because you do come here to know yourself better, and you choose to experience limits as a way to overcome them, literally. And some of those limits are horrible. So people would say, why would God actually allow you to do this? Well, the whole thing is it's not about God doing it or an external figure or entity doing that to you, but it's actually that your consciousness needs to understand itself better. And the only way to do that sometimes is by experiencing the extreme emptiness of what you truly are. And that's what I experienced in depression. I found this emptiness and I went, I'm nothing. And I even used to make a joke about it because I think, oh, you're too pathetic to even kill yourself. You know, that's the joke. I laugh now about it. I wasn't laughing at the time. But I found the nothing. And that was how I then started to feel, well, there's got to be something. But it took me years to find out what the something was, you know, maybe even 20 years to get a true sense of, oh, this is me. But that process started by feeling nothing, feeling empty and void of purpose, of the right to be alive. And it's an odd contradiction that sometimes people get stuck in. They think, oh, well, I don't feel worthy. So that's why they stay in that stuck circular habit. But the key is to see, maybe I need to be stuck here for a while. Maybe it's servicing something I don't even understand, because we don't know everything that's going on in our lives. We don't get the bigger picture. And then at some point, when you begin, and this is what I did in my depression, I said, I can't handle myself anymore. I can't handle my life. I need you, whatever you are out there, to take me into a different experience. So I asked to experience a different experience. And that's when you, as soon as the consciousness begins to ask, you start to create a pathway for the brain to even consider different options. I think one of the first things I asked for when I was 18 was like, I need friends. I want to have friends. I need to have friends that stimulate me. I have to have them. And I journaled it, and I made sure I thought about it a lot. And I started finding friends. I was shy, I was socially incompetent. I never talked to boys because I went to an all-girls school. And I started to make friends. So that was a big key, that not to think that if you're stuck that it's a problem, that sometimes there is a reason you have to be stuck. But as soon as you start to ask, change will start to happen. It may not happen overnight, but it starts to build the pathways in your consciousness to actually seek new behavior or new possibilities. And then as soon as you start to build that, if you go back to your old behavior, the trap is to think that, again, the old program, that something's wrong with you. So all you need to do is to simply keep focusing on, it's okay that I think something's wrong with me, and I still want that new friendship, or I still want that relationship. I still want to be better. The two parts of yourself are always going to coexist. Don't think that those negative voices will disappear. I still have voices that come to me and say, oh, who do you think you are? I still have that. But do I worry? No. Do I go into meditation and ask, okay, so what's that voice doing there? Sometimes. And other times I just continue on my way having a good time, because that pathway in my brain and my consciousness has been so practiced and so programmed with joy that it just naturally takes over and the little voice disappears. So the little voices can become big, but they can also become those things that are in the past.
It's interesting to hear the way you're talking about it. The way I think of it is that we have, with the focus of our attention, set certain destinations, and often when we're in this world, our destinations are in regard to, we end up focusing on others as the source of things for us, which causes us to ignore ourselves, which leads us to feel unworthy of our own attention, let alone others. And then we end up having that unworthiness feeling, and then that becomes our destination, because then we end up focusing on it, or whatever version of unworthiness, all sorts of versions of lack of attention. And then we set a new destination, and that point that you described with the, when we get deep enough into our darkness, then there's this point where it's like, the burden is too great. I can't do this anymore. I can't do this myself. And we just like let it off our back and say, you know, I need someone else to take this burden. It's not another person, and it's just this sense of like release, that we just let go of trying to do this all ourselves and just be like, I give up control. I'm ready to let something else take over, because I clearly can't do this myself. The burden is too great. It's like I'm holding the whole world on my shoulders. I'm just gonna let go of it, and I'm gonna trust that someone else can take it. And like that not someone else like in this world, just this sense like that like a larger expansiveness can just like take it from me and take care of it for me, and then I can just exist without that burden on my shoulders. And as soon as we do that, as soon as we let go, as soon as there's that release, there's well, what leads to that release is the fact that we set some new destination. Like, I would like something different from this. That there's like this openness suddenly, this request in the contrast, that we stop focusing on going the same direction we've been going, and because of the contrast of like, I can't do this anymore, I don't want this anymore. As soon as we're like, I'd like something else, that's when things start to open up and we start to experience that expansion. And so it's interesting because what you're saying here, the way you talk about it, that then there's that voice that does come up every once in a while sometimes, and we think that there's something wrong with us, that we would go back to the old stuff, and it's like, why is this coming up again? Why are these old thought patterns coming up again? These old feelings coming up again? And so in the context of this idea of like setting destinations, that when you plug a destination into your own internal GPS, then you're going to see the destinations that are incompatible with it, because your GPS is going to be like, okay, that's great, you just set this new destination, but this is in the other direction that you previously set. You know, we would need to address this. If you want to actually go to the new one, that's good, we like that, but we would just need to address this old one. And so as soon as we ask for a new thing, we get something, and we get like old things coming up, and it's like, why are things getting worse? And it's really just old destinations. So it's like you're saying, it's when we're able to approach that without judgment, without fear, and recognize, no, this has its place. I'm going to hear what's being said. Because in another version of my metaphor, besides the GPS idea, it's a relationship with ourselves. So now we're saying, I'd like a much better relationship with myself. I want to like myself. I want things to be good with me, my relationship with me. And then our self is like, okay, but things haven't been like that. You treated me this way and this way and this way. And then it's up to us to be like, yes, you're right. And then we see it through everyone around us. And like, people come in and we remember old relationships where we were treated that way. And like, you know, our own thoughts, feelings, instincts are like, but you treated me this way. And then we're like, yes, I did treat you that way. That was terrible. I'm really sorry I did that. I want to go this way. I do want to improve this relationship. And then they're like, okay, that's good. You treated me this way. And then we get thrown back something else with someone else, and something, you know, something from growing up, or something with a friend. And then we actually encounter something, and it comes up for us again. It's like, oh, I remember that feeling. Why am I feeling that again? It's just the old destination. It's just the old relationship dynamics. And it's for us to acknowledge, hear out, and then go forward toward our new destination. But if we don't acknowledge and hear out what's being said, we can't go forward to the new destination. Because just like in any relationship, if you don't acknowledge what's being said when they're like, we didn't have a great relationship before. You want to have a great relationship? Well, this is why we didn't, and this was on you. You know, and then until that gets addressed, we can't actually go forward. You know, like they want us to acknowledge and apologize, and it's for us to actually acknowledge, because ultimately, otherwise, how are they going to know that we even know what we did that made it so that we didn't have this great relationship? If they don't know that we know that we have to be aware of why we didn't have a good relationship, that we focused on these things instead of these things, that this was, you know, we gave all this negative attention, we were controlling, we weren't listening, we weren't paying attention, we were treating them as though they were unworthy of our attention. Until we do that, until we acknowledge that, then we can't actually heal the relationship. So that's what that hearing, listening, just being with the feelings is about. Because if we hear what they're saying, rather than resisting hearing them, then we can acknowledge them for what they're saying, and then say, I actually do want to go forward to this new destination. I request this. This would be much better. And then they're like, we want that also. We just wanted to know that you know what's happening so that we can consistently go in that direction, instead of falling back here because you didn't know why we even had that experience in the past. now you know, so we can go forward. Let's do it.
Jonathan, there's something I wanted to share about also when we review those so-called old voices. There's a concept that people have that, oh, I've forgiven that part of myself that hated myself. I've forgiven that person that hurt me. And they think that acceptance or forgiveness of a hurt part of yourself is a one-time process. And this is one of my most shocking and frustrating experiences, because I spent 10 years trying to get over myself, and then another 10 years building my sense of who I was in my 20s to my 30s to my early 30s. I took a long time to forgive myself and get over myself. And so when I find people think, oh, I've already done this, I've already dealt with that feeling of I'm too fat, or I'm not good enough, or I always attract the wrong man. I've already done this. It's like, it's not a one-time process. The brain, when you get a negative habit or thought or an emptiness or a void, that happens a lot. That's programmed unconsciously. And if you believe in lifetimes before this life, that also can carry over from other lives. If you don't, then just think about all of the moments that you had before you were able to even speak, where things didn't work for you as a child, and you had nothing in your brain to tell you that there was nothing wrong. Bad things would happen, someone would scream, and you would get scared. I mean, that's happening to you for a good at least 5 years of your life before you can even think properly, before your brain's formed. And you think that you do like one time of coaching or one process and you think you've actually healed. I think you're kind of looking at it from a mathematical formula than a human formula. Human body itself is hardwired to store hurt and fear. So we actually have to do a lot of process throughout our whole life on even the same situation. So, example, I had a bad relationship, one of my first relationships. I had a bad experience. And that was like 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 20-something years ago. And even to this day, I'll have a flash of a bad feeling that I had from that moment. I'm still having it in my body, but I see it from a whole different perspective. I'm not as charged as I was when it happened or even 10 years after, but I'm still carrying the memory and the ghost of it. And I see it as a totally much more mature person. But I still even now have to go, okay, why is that showing up in my life now? What is that showing me? And I still may have to do more forgiveness of myself. In fact, right now, as we speak, I'm actually working on seeing how I'm still working on forgiving myself for not being more assertive for my own needs in my relationships when I was younger. And as a woman, that's really self-deprecating. When you've done that in your teenage years or 20s, and you may have sort of compromised, and I don't mean just your body, I mean you're emotionally, you may have not stood up for yourself. In my 40s, I'm now actually going, oh, I'm sorry, Angela, for actually not being there for you. And I'm working on that. And part of what happens is that things from my past relationships may come up to remind me and say, you're at a new phase of growth now. And in order to see myself able to step up and be more assertive, I need to actually have had those experiences in my early relationships. So that's one thing I do want to really share with folks, that don't think that forgiveness or healing or getting over those negative voices is something you should do in a snap. It's a process, and it's something that is a lifetime growth. And as you grow, your ability to love yourself is bigger. But the memories will be there, and they're necessary.
And I think I would say, I totally agree with you. I would say that the memories are coming up like you're saying, because there's still something to address. But I would say it's actually that in that moment, in some way, you're doing something that looks like that past experience. You know, it's like if you're in a traumatic relationship with someone and they treat you terribly, and then things start to improve and they're treating you much better, and but then they slip one day and they treat you some way that looks a little bit like they used to treat you, and it triggers everything, and you feel like you're going to go right back to that. And that's what ourselves are saying to us. Like our own thoughts, feelings, instincts are like, you just did something that looked a little bit like you did years ago. I hope we're not going back there. That's terrifying. And then that's why it's up to us to then apologize again, because it's like, no, I didn't mean to, I don't actually want to treat you that way. That was terrible. I notice I've improved. Like this wasn't as bad as it was years ago, but I see why you would bring that up. And I'm sorry again. And I'm sorry that ever happened. And I know that there's still more like apologizing to do here. and because I want you to feel like I'm actually treating you differently, and that's going to be a consistent thing. And I know that I'll slip up once in a while, and you can just remind me, and I'll apologize again and be more on top of it. I'll treat you better. And that's my intention, that we have that conversation with ourselves regularly. Yeah, whenever the things are coming up.
Yeah. Oh gosh, relationships are our greatest.
Say it again.
Relationships are our greatest teacher.
Definitely. So in this whole picture with our relationships with ourselves and our relationships with others, and this apologizing and everything else, let's go into, how does the universe work? What are the most fundamental rules or laws by which everything in the world operates?
Well, I'll give credit to Helen from johnthebeloved.com, but basically it was, again, be who you are. Be yourself is one of the most important laws. And saying that, there's two other laws that go with that are key fundamental truths, because the more you are yourself doesn't mean you're going to be loving it to everybody or nice, but you're not going to be living this conditioned self that's trying to be that cookie cutter person that you think you should be, and pushing away the parts you don't think you should be. And you will also acknowledge your gifts. So that's one of the key things, which we've already discussed. And then I think following that, it's to accept that everybody's unique. Every consciousness has a purpose. So this computer has a purpose. If you're one of those people that hates technology, then there's something there for you to look at about what you're not accepting. So the second law about truly being who you are is to accept that everybody else has to be who they are. And everything, every fish, every genetically modified product, there's a purpose to it. If you judge genetically modified, look, I don't like to eat genetically modified foods, but there's a purpose for it right now. We've got 7 billion people on the planet. And even if we could organically grow everything, which I don't think is possible physically, we don't have the civilization to do that right now. So accepting that there's a purpose for everything, even if you don't like it, just accepting things. And then thirdly, this is the biggest one for me, which changed my life, was to not harm others. In the process of being who I am, to not harm others. So greed is something that is still out. It's causing a lot of trouble in our planet, but also in the universal level. If you go to other planets, they're not trying to like dominate resources from some Mars and take it to Venus and hoard all the stuff. There's a sort of harmony that happens in the rest of the universe that doesn't quite happen on Earth. So I think universally these laws about not interfering with other people's lives and not taking or harming is something that is very much a big piece that we're still trying to balance on Earth. We're not really there yet. And a lot of people go, well, if we are spiritual, why are we having wars? And it's a great question. And it's honestly because we're not being who we are. If we were all who we were and accepted others and learned and lived lives where we didn't harm others, we would be living much more in alignment with the universal laws. So they're the three biggies. There are more that are connected to them, which are about understanding when we go into judging something, or if, for example, I'll take the genetic modified stuff. Look, I don't like it, okay? And I'm guilty of complaining about genetic modified foods a lot. But if I go into actually go, well, hang on, what's going on here? And actually start to think about the purpose of it, why it happened, why those cultures were forced to do it, what created it, how we could balance it now, they're better questions. Just getting sucked into the whole conspiracy thing, thinking it's a bad thing, that's not a universal way of operating. A universal way of operating would be going, okay, what's really going on here? And then asking questions of how to make this better, but also to make sure everybody gets what they need. Some of the universal laws that I think we're really only just beginning to bring into society are to really ask questions like, do we have other options besides nuclear power reactors? Japan was a huge step forward in that crisis when they said, we've got to get rid of them. And then Germany stood up and said, yes, we're going to take them out. We're actually, as a globe, starting to think about things that war has just inspired us to do. And we're starting to take steps. We don't see that on the news so much. We see a lot more of the war. But globally, countries are actually starting to question, what do we need to be in more harmony? And I think harmony is one of the universal laws that we're only just starting to understand. So the more that you work on harmony within yourself, with not judging yourself, you're actually going to become in alignment with the harmony that's the actual basis of the universe. Doesn't mean we're all lovely and fluffy, and it means that we just accept people, and you might keep people at arm's distance if you don't like them, but you don't complain about them and you don't let it stop your day.
Well, it's interesting, all those being so interrelated, everything you just said, because ultimately, if you're fully accepting of yourself, then you would be accepting of everyone and everything around you. It's when there are judgments within yourself that you would end up finding things to judge outside you, and then it would be up to us to ask, up to ourselves to ask, what are we judging and why? And how is this about me? How am I judging something in myself? And this is reflecting that, because I wouldn't be in judging mode if I didn't have any judging in myself, if I wasn't, making any judgments already. So if I were completely accepting, then I'd be okay with this. So what's going on there? What is this bringing up for me? What am I judging in myself that this is, touching upon a sensitive issue for me, that I would be inclined to judge this and get riled up about this outside me? And then when we can, resolve that, again, it's about hearing what the emotions are saying, like we were saying earlier. Hearing what they're really saying rather than getting afraid of them and judging them, to actually hear what everything's really saying. And if there's negative stuff coming up, what is it saying to us? What are we not hearing? What are we not accepting? What are we judging that we could be accepting?
Yeah. Yeah, I had to do that with genetically modified foods, because I was
yeah. What did it
quite
bring
upset.
you?
Well, I was eating a little bit more because I had a very healthy diet. I still do. But I was getting really just paranoid about not being well after eating a little bit more genetically modified corn. And that simply was just more than I had eaten before. And I got physically concerned about my health, and I got a little bit mentally imbalanced again. And for me, having a history of having a lot of mental thoughts that were disturbing, that was annoying. And I started to get upset that I'd eat these foods and I'd have these reactions in my body. And then I started thinking that nobody should be eating it. But then I took a step back and I went, hang on, it's not just about you, Angela. You're part of 7 billion plus people. What's going on here? So I can still have my neurotic personality, and I can still choose, I don't want to eat that stuff, I'm going to buy other foods And I have that freedom because I live in a first world country, or two of them, Australia and the US, so I'm blessed. I have choice. I'm not like other countries that don't have that choice. So actually, I could turn it into a blessing that I have choice, firstly, and that why should I take that choice away from other people who are using that as an option to sustain themselves? I don't need to, and then that took away a lot of my having to judge. But I first had to see why I was so upset, like you said. I had to go inside and go, hang on, why am I feeling this way?
It's interesting how this goes back to what you were saying earlier about how there's a place for the negative feelings, that that there's a time when we were in that place, in a less positive place, and there was a place for that. It wasn't like we were never supposed to feel those feelings of unworthiness. We felt them. We were there. So we were in that place, and now we're in a different place. Now, it's not that we should erase the previous place. It's not that that should never have existed. It's not even that we should leap to expansion, that there was no place for that more contracted place. It's that there's a place for the contracted place on the way of expanding. And so to recognize that there's a place, you know, that we're at different stages of development, and what's right for us isn't necessarily right for everyone, not just because we're different people, but also because we're in different places in the process of expansion. And what might feel right or wrong for us is not necessarily right or wrong for someone else, because we're in a different place in that process of expansion. And so it's not for us to decide this is how everyone should be, or this is what everyone should do, or this is how everyone should view things, because ultimately then we would be failing to acknowledge the role and the place of different parts of the process of development, that we can be in different parts of the process, and that other people could be in different places in that process as compared to where we are right now. And so then we can say, I realize a more expanded place at this moment, maybe from this other way of being, or maybe a less expanded place from this other way of being, but ultimately that I can accept where I am in this expansion. I can accept where I am in this process, and I accept where that other person is in their process because I was there once, and I accept where this other person is while still accepting myself because I will be there one day, and I'm on my way there. And in this process of expansion, we could just be where we are and let everyone else be where they are, in addition to all of our own individualistic things, that there is a process, and it's not wrong for someone to be in one place just because we're no longer there or because we haven't gotten there yet. That it's up to us to just let that expansion take place and accept where we are and where everyone else is in that journey.
Yeah, I love how you put it, Jonathan. What helped me a lot, especially in my personal relationships, what helped me to accept people was that to realize that I don't have to like you, but I can accept you. Because I think our conditioning in society is that we have to be polite, we have to be nice. Maybe not so much for the younger kids these days, but when I grew up, you had to be nice to people. But meanwhile, in your head, you're going, oh, I really don't like that person, or I wish they didn't do that. And that's part of the negative stuff. It's okay to not like them, but it doesn't mean I have to wish them bad or I have to think they're wrong. So if we take the pressure off of having to like people, but just ask, okay, what can we do to all get along here? It starts to change the dynamic of relationship. And sometimes you just need to put in some boundaries with people, and they may need to be negotiated. And if we're looking at countries, that's what is going to start happening. It's already happening, but it does take decades and centuries to get it to a level where we may not have war. And so it's the process again. And if we individually, those who are watching this video looking for spiritual growth, if we do that in our personal relationships, it starts to impact your community, and it starts to impact in your neighbourhood. So it is about that old-fashioned thing, you know, start at home. Charity begins at home. Grace, love begins at home. You've got to start. That's what I always teach. I experience it myself. I always felt that way because I didn't leave the house much when I was a kid. So my main relationships were that nuclear family. And I've been working on those relationships all my life. But if you bring it home, it starts to then give you a good base to also grow into a different relationship with your community.
Definitely. I mean, totally. Obviously, the relationship begins at home, or the ultimate home within ourselves, and then spreads outward from there. And so if we address the root of all those dynamics, then we can actually, you know, have that new dynamic expand outward as we change the dynamic with ourselves. It's interesting what you're saying about the idea of lost it for a moment. That you were talking about people, right? So that we cannot like people, but we can still accept them. It's interesting because if we're not liking them, and then you pointed out, you know, we could ask the question, how could we all get along? If you're not liking them, then there is something that you're not liking in yourself in some form that's coming up that they're showing you. And you said sometimes you just need to assert boundaries because they might be showing you that you're not actually clear about where your boundaries are. And then obviously then that would make them bother you because they're crossing your boundaries. And then it would be up to us to say, okay, I obviously don't like that I'm not setting firm boundaries. Like, I think I'm upset with them, but I'd really like to address the fact that I don't have firm boundaries. Let me be clear about my boundaries so that I could have better dynamics with other people where they wouldn't be crossing my boundaries and I would not like them. And then we can actually be in that place of accepting them because we're not blaming them for crossing our boundaries. We're taking response, and we're not blaming ourselves for letting our boundaries be crossed. We're just taking responsibility. All right, I realize that I let people cross my boundaries. I want to have clearer boundaries. So I would like to address that with myself. Now there's no one not to like. You know, I can now accept everyone.
I think you should do a boundary setting workshop or something. That's probably the easiest way for us to get along. How to just say, I don't want you to do this to me. Thanks.
Right. Yeah, that would be pretty cool. Think about that. So obviously we have all these really important lessons. What do you believe is the most important thing for every person to know? If you could tell every human being on the planet one thing, what would it be?
I believe it's you are not a failure. You are not a failure. You didn't fail. And I'd say it until they felt it, because there's not enough times that you cannot remember that statement. It seems to me, in my experience with dealing with people's emotions, that they somehow feel they messed up big time and they can't fix it. And if I could rewire the circuitry of our beautiful human body and brain, I would put another override program, which is you are not a failure and you are so much more. But firstly, just to know that deep down you are not a failure. And if I could give every child that workshop, I would, because then they would actually begin to understand, oh, well, if I'm not that, then what am I? And ask the questions like kids do. They go, oh, what am I? They start to explore. But all the conditioning of society comes in, and that conditioning is so ancient that it's really strong, and it then triggers our own innate thinking that there's something wrong with us. So that would be the main message, and then there's so much more part of what you are. I really think just to truly, I don't want to just say enjoy it, but I think just dive into who you are, because you don't know, and you don't need to know who you are, but you just need to have a good time really exploring and experiencing what that is. And I wish you to have that. I wish you to really dive in. A friend of mine actually has created a deck of cards called the Dive In deck. and she's a bit younger than me, and I was like, oh, that's a really beautiful way to look at life, isn't it? Just dive in, feel it, experience it, embrace what it could be for you. And even if it's not comfortable, to just feel what it could be if it was more comfortable. Just taking that one glimmer of what it could be if you wanted it to be different. Going back to what we said earlier about just ask for it to be what you want.
Thank you, Angela. That's a great lesson. That's obviously, if we could all hear that, and then start contemplating what we really are, that would be amazing. That we're not a failure, and that then there's something for us to fill in, and that we could just dive into life and enjoy the process the way you're making it sound. That might as well enjoy it. We're here. We might as well enjoy it. It's a great lesson. And a great message to share with everyone. Thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure to speak with you, Angela. And thanks for sharing your story and your lessons.
I had a ball. It was lovely to share with you, Jonathan.
Thank you. And thank you to all who are watching. Have a great day.